Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyways for some of those who do not know him or who have not met him yet or heard him yet. His name is Mark Reynolds, and he's our intrepid executive director, CCL. He's been working with organizations and individuals for over 31 years to empower them to make a difference in their world. Much of that time was spent in the public and corporate world providing training programs he designed and led on effective communication, leadership, team building, and time management. As the scientific body of evidence showed a consensus in peer-reviewed papers, studies, and publications, Mr. Reynolds looked for an avenue to reverse man-made problems related to climate change. The purpose of Citizens Climate Lobby is to create the political will for sustainable climate and to empower individuals to have breakthroughs in exercising their personal and political power. I want to repeat that. In exercising their personal and political power. It's very important. Mr. Reynolds chose to leave the corporate world to apply his expertise to a nonprofit organization that had an approach to responding to climate change, which is a match for science. Mr. Reynolds. This is the guy I want to be like when I grow up.
I just first of all want to say, Kathy, all the way in the back, somebody tap her. Kathy, I just want to say again how completely blown away I am by this organizing effort and what a complete privilege it is to be able to come up here and be part of it. So this is great work. I want to talk about Dr. Hayhoe for just a moment again. How many of you have seen Years of Living Dangerously? Have you seen that? Okay, I know that I am way over biased in this matter, but I think there's everything else on that show and then there's what she does, and that she just sticks out. And I think that part of what we should learn from Dr. Hayhoe is not just what she says, but her way of being. She brings more joy to this issue than anybody I know. And she brings a kind of, you know, I'll just use her own words. There's a 3.5-minute clip of her on her that you can get through our website where she says, when you come to this issue through fear, you're looking in the wrong place because you're looking at yourself. She said, when you come to this issue through love, you have your attention everywhere it should be, which is on everybody but yourself. Now, she said she comes to that through her faith, which I'm great with. But I think that what we can learn from her is not just what she talks about and not how she points about the things that, how we could approach people, but I think what makes her so impactful is her basic way of being, how she approaches it, who she is. I don't know about you, but I just want to be around her every time I see her. And I think that that is the case for almost everybody who runs into her. So I think we can learn from her not just what she says, but how she comes to the issue. I also wanted to mention that, you know, the song that we sang this morning using the O Canada song, but O North America. So Kathy sang that on our staff call one morning. We have a staff call on Mondays and Thursday mornings because everybody's in different places and it's a way for us to connect with each other. So she sang it on our staff call, and then she wasn't really happy with that version, so she recorded one in the bathroom. And as you know, acoustics are good in the bathroom, and so she sent me that in a text, and I listened to it, and so she was talking to me one day, and I said, you know, Kathy, your singing in the bathroom is really outstanding. And she said, I don't think you're understanding how the people in the car with me are hearing this. Oh, Lord. I also thought from our previous talk that one thing that you and I could take into account, that part of our job is to impress on citizens how important it is that we provide the correct atmosphere or environment for politicians to work. And I think that that's something that we should be taking people, not confrontationally, but asking people to do and taking people to task that you know, who creates the atmosphere in which politicians work? Well, sure, politicians do to a certain degree also, but that's our obligation, I think, as citizens, is to give them an environment where someone would be proud of saying, I'm a politician. And I think that that's one of the things that we're working on. I think it's really important, and I think that the comments from the previous talk point to how important that is. Okay, so as Jerry mentioned, I spent a lot of my life in the corporate world working on corporate productivity. The company that I worked for most recently, before coming to Citizens Climate Lobby, the name of it was Mission Control, that did productivity programs inside of corporations. And interestingly enough, my two biggest of clients at that, when I left the organization, were Boeing and NASA. And I loved doing the programs at NASA because I was working with their top scientists and engineers, and I always liked starting a presentation by saying, you know, good morning, my name's Mark Reynolds, and I'm the one here from Mission Control. I'll also mention that there's, I'm from San Diego, that's where I live, and there's a Mark Reynolds who lives in my neighborhood who's fairly famous. He's about my age, and he's a world-famous sailor. He's won Olympic and world championships in the star class. And so my oldest son, whose name is Mark, when he was 12, our neighbors were taking sailing lessons, and they said, can they bring Mark along? And sure. You know, summer, you're always trying to figure out ways to fill up your kids' time, right? So they get there and they say, oh, your name's Mark Reynolds. And they said, well, what's your dad's name? And he says, Mark Reynolds. And so they get excited and they say, is he the Mark Reynolds? My son says, yes, he is. So my wife straightened him out. In family gatherings, my wife generally refers to me as him. So part of my definition of a successful marriage, I've been married successfully, really successfully, for 34 years, and part of my definition is for that is you may have been reduced from a proper noun to a pronoun, but you're still happily married. Okay, so when I did the work inside a corporation, we found that to actually have our work be impactful, that we had to work on 3 levels. And we had a lot of evidence that our work was working, in that we found there were a lot of metrics that we could measure that told us if people were using their time really well or not. And we would measure them before our programs, and then we would measure them several months later, because, you know, anybody can do a program and have people walk out and be excited. That's not hard. The question is, can you do something that has some lasting impact? So we would measure a lot of things, and it certainly helped us anyway, because when we went back to sell additional programs to the companies, we would say, look, according to what we've measured, and they couldn't argue about what we were measuring, you've saved about 5 times what you invested in this program in employee time. They're spending more time on activities that they believe are of greatest importance to them. So we had some evidence that our approach was working. So the 3 levels we worked on is we did work on new tools and techniques. You had to give people something to do. You'd say, you know, you used to do this. So for instance, a lot of people here have been in some of the group leader sessions, and you know that one of the things I've always recommended is that you get rid of your to-do list and you replace it with a calendar. So that's one of the things we would recommend to people, that everything you do requires time, and if you begin to confront the amount of time, you begin to actually understand what you can say yes and no to. And most of us are terrible at saying no. But if you begin to confront the actual amount of time it takes to do stuff, you can begin to see that there are many cases that you say yes when you shouldn't, because you simply don't have the time to do it. And so if we can be more honest about what time it actually takes us to do things, probably be more effective, because we can just work on what we're working on and not suffer about what we are not doing. The second level we would work on is work habits. And that is, you know, just take that simple example of replacing people's to-do lists with a calendar. You know, enough of us here have studied habitual behavior, have had people in our lives that have dealt with addiction issues, and you know it takes about 30 times to incorporate any new behavior. So we would deal with the habits that people had come up with over work, and really make a pretty strong assertion that if you weren't going to incorporate some new work habits with the tools, there was no point in even trying to use the tools, because all you would do is suffer about what you weren't doing. So we would work on those 2 levels. And both of those were important. But really the only thing that mattered was the 3rd level that we worked on with people, and that was the context in which they worked. And I talked about this a little bit yesterday, that a lot of the way people describe work is debilitating. You know, they use the term, oh, it's Monday, as if describing how terrible the next week's going to be, or it's Friday, this torture's almost over. And if you look at how most people approach work, you'll see there's a bunch of things they don't say out loud, but the basic context in which they work is not one that empowers them to do their best work. Now, inevitably, every time I would do this program, there would always be someone who would come up to me and say, I don't know what you're really talking about because I love my job. And you know, you would have to go through the explanation of saying, well, perhaps you could contemplate that there are cultural issues that are happening that are bigger than just you and your worldview. But nevertheless, there would always be someone who would come up and say that, and you notice, you would say to them, you know, nobody says, it's Monday, Fred. So it's not your worldview we're looking at. We're looking at one that most of us have just kind of basically accepted. So what we found is the context was really the most impactful thing. And that's what I want to see if I can just have a little teensy bit of impact on today, and that is the context in which people work. Okay. So one of the people that I studied for the last 25 years is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Fernando Flores, who's from Chile. And the study that Dr. Flores was really created some groundbreaking work in, and a lot of people have studied him and followed him and developed off of his work, is Dr. Flores was interested in the difference between things that you could say that merely described what happened versus those things that you could say that actually make something happen. So Dr. Flores was interested in, are there components of language that aren't merely descriptive, but are in fact action? So are there things that you could say, to oversimplify it, could I say table and a table would happen? Can you say table and have a table happen? And there are several categories that Dr. Flores identified that have to do with when you say something, something actually happens, and all of them exist in the arena of commitments. So every single thing that he spoke about existed inside of the arena of what you would call making commitments, and I want to just speak to one piece, and that is the area of commitments called declarations. So there are certain cases where when you say something, because you have the authority to say so, it becomes that thing in the moment you say it. Okay, so how many of us here are married? How many of us here are married? Okay, or have ever been married, right? Okay, or know people who are married. Everybody. So, in the right condition, at the moment that a priest or a rabbi or whatever official, like a justice of the peace in my case, the moment they say you're married, you are. That's the moment you become married. Now, you know, you always have to worry when you're talking to climate activists, because a lot of them are old-time hippies, and they say, oh no, it happened for us when we said it before the sacred oak tree. No, it didn't. It actually became something that was real, that existed in the world that you and I live in, when somebody who had the authority to say it said it. Also is the case of, for those of us who have children. They have the name they have because we have the authority to declare their name. So, for instance, my eldest son's name is Mark. We actually never even planned on naming him Mark, but it was one of those cases where when he was born, it was like, wow. The only difference between his birth picture and mine is mine in black and white and his is in color. It was just, it simply became inappropriate to name him anything else. But because of the authority you have as a parent, when you say your child's name, that is the name they have. And then, you know, I always like the case that I read about in Sports Illustrated about 20 years ago. I was reading an interview with baseball umpires, and they talked to the relatively new umpire, and they said to him, how do you determine if it's a ball or a strike? What do you look at to determine if it's a ball or a strike? And the relatively new umpire said, well, I call him the way I see him. Seems like a pretty good answer, right? So then they talked to a guy who'd been around a little bit longer, and they said, is that what you do? Do you call him the way you see him? And he says, no, I don't. He says, I call him the way they are. Whoa, right? Sounds like a whole different level of authority, doesn't it? So then they go to the old guy that trains umpires, and they said, well, which is it? Is it the way you see him, Or is it the way you are? They are. And he says, you want to know something? They ain't nothing till I call them. And that is, in fact, the authority that an umpire has, right? I don't care where the pitch goes. If he says it's a strike, including if it goes over the fence, it is because he has the authority to call it, right? Okay, so I want to get at this in the area of what we can say about ourselves. I want to just mention a few things other people have talked about in terms of shaping their life by commitment, and then I want to see how that affects us. A couple from George Bernard Shaw, and then one, oddly enough, from an advertisement from the Wall Street Journal that Shearson Lehman put in there. So our George Bernard Shaw in 1893 in Mrs. Warren's Profession said, people are always blaming their circumstances for what they are. I don't believe in circumstances. The people who get on in this world are people who get up and look for the circumstances they want, and if they can't find them, they make them. Shearson Lehman, May 30th, 1984, in the Wall Street Journal. Commitment is what transforms promise into reality. It is the words that speak boldly of your intentions and the actions which speak louder than the words. It is making the time when there is none, coming through time after time, year after year. Commitment is the stuff character is made of, the power to change the face of things, and then I love this final line. It is the daily triumph of integrity over skepticism. It is the daily triumph of integrity over skepticism. And then let me give you one more thing from Shaw. And excuse me, you know, a lot of people that like to quote wrote 100 years ago, and of course they only said man, so if you could just listen woman when I say man. Yeah, you're welcome. The reasonable man adapts himself to the conditions that surround him. The unreasonable man adapts surrounding conditions to himself. All progress depends on the unreasonable man. Okay, so one of the volunteers in CCL's name is Jay Butera. And Jay is a retired businessman from Pennsylvania. And one of the things he noticed was that in Miami, when it's high tide, the ocean actually washes up into the sewers and fills the streets of Miami. And so it was his belief, even though he lived in Pennsylvania, that one of the most crucial places for us to be organized as an organization was Florida. So what did he do? He bought himself a plane ticket and he flew to Florida. He didn't know anybody. He didn't have any appointments set up. He just said, we need to, given that's happening, this is probably one of the most important places that we can be organized. And so he got off the plane for 2 weeks and tried to find people that he could talk to. Literally. Didn't have anybody he was going to stay with, didn't have anybody he was going to have coffee with. He just got off the plane and started finding places that people congregated and talked to them, and ended up with 70 names of people who were interested in starting new CCL groups, and we've in fact expanded our operation in Florida because of that. He also made a point of developing a relationship with a lot of members of the Florida delegation, including the two senators, Senators Rubio and Nelson. I don't know how much you follow the U.S. news, but about 6 months ago they were interviewing Marco Rubio about climate change, and he made just about as stupid a comment as you can make. And so every single reporter that talked to him since then asked him for clarification, and the more they asked for clarification, the worse it got. You know, the less sense it made, the more embarrassing it was, and every environmental group pounced on him and said, look, see what blockheads people who don't accept science are, and look how stupid he is, and isn't this funny and stupid. And I have to admit that I spent a fair amount of time laughing about it, because it was just one of those things you had to laugh about. The answers were so preposterous. So Jay thought that that would be a good time to reintroduce himself to the staff at Senator Rubio's office and let them know that while he didn't agree with the statements that Mr. Rubio was making, it in no way changed our position of supporting working with him. He said the staffer that he went in to see looked like she'd been run over by a train. And he said, you know, this must have been the worst week of your life. And she said it was. This was rough. So he sat down and just listened to her and said, you know, I don't agree with Senator Rubio said. We'll continue to hold him account to the actual science that's happening, but our support for you doesn't waver in any way. So she sent him a note a couple days later. I don't know how many times you get notes from MPs, staffers, or from MPs spontaneously, but she sent him a note saying, I have never needed someone to be a friend more than I did in that moment. And your coming in was that exact moment I needed. So I asked Jay, what organizes you? What world are you looking at that has you respond in the way you're responding? So Jay wrote this statement, which is just a declaration of his commitment. So, you know, Dr. Flores talked about times where something becomes the case because you say it. And one of the things that he suggested is that you can say who you are in the face of the circumstances you deal with. So I've been working with this a lot with some of the groups in the U.S. because they were so devastated by the election, right? And you know, there's all kind of a reflexive response that we all have when things go wrong. It's automatic. You don't have to think about it. When things go wrong, like many people experienced for the U.S. election 3 weeks ago, there's 3 questions people ask. And they're all is, what's wrong? And the first question is, what's wrong with me? Why didn't I do more? Why didn't I donate more money? Why didn't I walk to more houses? And, you know, that's an interesting question for a little while. But if you spend too much time on it, you end up paying people to help you with it. So, you know, you don't want to stay too interested in what's wrong with you for too long. And then the second question is, well, what's wrong with them? Why didn't everybody else try harder? Why did the Democrats not run on Obama's record? And again, you know, if you start telling people what's wrong with them, eventually they tell you they're not going to hang out with you. So it doesn't stay interesting for that long either. But the really tough one is the third question people ask, and that's what's wrong with it. And they're talking about a generality that can't ever argue back. So they're saying, what's wrong with the government? What's wrong with politics? What's wrong with the system? You know, sometimes, you know, what's wrong with Republicans? What's wrong with Democrats? What's wrong with NDP? What's wrong with liberals? The problem is there's no specific person to argue back, and then you and I get set in certain views of things that are in response to the question, what's wrong? And I'm not saying that those aren't useful questions to ask. They are to a certain degree. The question that I think is more interesting and what we ought to use to orient our action is, what are we committed to? And so here's what Jay said. He said, and he says this every day, he gets up and this is what he looks himself in the mirror and says every day. I believe that I can have a major impact on the fate of our planet if I work tirelessly towards climate solutions, think big, and act fearlessly. I believe that bold actions by a few brave people can change the course of history and stabilize the Earth's climate. I believe I am one of those people. Doing so will not be easy or comfortable, but it is definitely possible. And since it is possible, I must try. I will not give up. So I want to pass out Jay's statement. Where's Jerry? Oh yeah, these are all collated on the table there. Yeah. I want to pass out Jay's statement, and I want you to use it as a reference guide of, could you make a similar statement of your commitment to what we're doing that orients you in the face of things that happen, because big things happen in this. You know, sometimes just little things happen, but occasionally, you know, a quarter of Antarctica falls off. And you go, holy cow, right? And when those things happen, I just want to go lie down in the street and let cars run over me. But I believe the most effective response we can have to what we're doing is one that is dictated, is shaped by what we say we're committed to. So I want to give you Jay's statement, but then on the back there's plenty of time to write. And I want to give you a couple of minutes to write, you know, what is your expression? If you could say, who am I in the matter of what we're dealing with, What would your be expression of that? So I'm just going to give you about 5 minutes to see if you can articulate that. You can actually use Jay's, or the back of that paper has lines on it, so I'll give you about 5 minutes to work on that.
I will take this opportunity to answer a web question from Todd Elvins asking how many people are watching this live stream online. And it's a little hard to tell with the technology we have. We know that there are at least 4 viewers using the Google Hangouts interface, but there could be many more using the YouTube interface. And the whole conference will be broadcast live. Yes, I'll read out to the audience the handout that has been distributed to the crowd that people are working on. It says, why I act on climate. I believe that I can have a major impact on the fate of our planet if I work tirelessly towards climate solutions, think big, and act fearlessly. I believe that bold actions by a few brave people can change the course of history and stabilize the Earth's climate. I believe I am one of those people. Doing this will not be easy or comfortable, but it is definitely possible. And since it is possible, I must try. I will not give up. By Jay Butera. And on the back, people can write in their own reasons as to why they act on climate. This live stream is being recorded, and it will be available indefinitely on Citizens Climate Lobby Canada's Google Hangouts page and on our YouTube channel as well.
Okay, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to share whatever you came up with at your table. And I want to just point to something that ordinarily, if we were going to be talking about something right now, and we were going to be listening to what other people said, we'd be listening through a couple of views, one of which is, are what they're saying, is it accurate? Which is not the case in this kind of statement. The case in this kind of statement is, does it get to you? Does it make the hair on the back of your neck stand up? Does it give you a little bit better view of the world to work from? So that's the perspective you're listening from for yourself. Is your statement something that reaches into you? Clearly Jay has gotten that statement right for himself, and I actually like what he says better than anything I've come up with. I actually love, how many of you have any scouting in your background? How many have scouting in your background? Remember the just basic phrase that Scouts live by, which was to leave the campground cleaner than you found it? I find that extremely pure and effective. You know, if that's just one of the things that's oriented us all the time, are we leaving the campground cleaner? It's so simple and yet so pure, and there's nothing there to argue about it. The other thing that I caution you to do is as you're sharing this at the table, it's impossible to listen to this and not compare yourself to others. You know, so sometimes people read it really, really good when you go, oh crap, that's better than mine. Or someone will read one that's kind of flat and you're like, oh great, mine sounds better than that. So I don't think you can ever get away from that, but if you could just give yourself some room, that's one of the things we do is we're always comparing ourselves to other people. Whether it's useful or not, I don't know. But just if you could listen for what's useful in what they say, and particularly what's useful in yours. So we're going to give you a few minutes to go around the table and give you a chance to share what you've come up with so far and see if it's something that's getting close to what you want, because you won't know if this works until you begin to say it out loud. You will not know if this works for you until you begin to hear what it sounds like out loud and the impact it has on you when you say it. So we'll give you a few minutes around the table to just share what you came up with. Please go ahead. For any of you who are listening online and you're wanting to know what the impact of your statement is, I haven't found a better tool for communicating than the mirror. Every single time I work with people on training them to present, I encourage them to do a lot of mirror work, because if you can reach the person in the mirror, if you can connect with that person, if you can move that person, you can move anybody. So to take your statement, you might just say it out loud, but if you want to find out that it's really useful to you, you might want to walk into a room where there's a mirror and say it out loud to the mirror and see if it reaches you. If it does, you got it right. If it doesn't yet, maybe you have some more work to do.
Thank you, Mark. So while we're waiting here, this is Yannick. I'm the audiovisual technician for the web streaming here, and there's no one at my table here, so I have no one to share with. So I will share with our audience here. The reason why I act on climate change is because I am an engineer, and I made a commitment when I became an engineer to place the public welfare to make.
Okay, really good. Thank you. Please just thank the people at your table for listening to you for a second. So just tell them thank you. 2 minutes. 2 minutes to wrap this up. Stay here. Stay here. Stay with me. Okay, thank you so much. 2 more minutes. Don't worry. We're one more. Oh, right. Okay, 2 more minutes. Fine. Keep going for 2 more minutes.
So as I was saying, according to engineers' codes of ethics everywhere, the public safety is paramount. Should be the paramount consideration of engineers in their actions. And climate change is largely caused by burning fossil fuels in machines that were designed by engineering. And in these circumstances, when an engineer discovers that something that we have been working on causes potential harm to the public, we must report it to the client, and if he fails to pay attention, to the regulators, and if they fail to pay attention to the public, to warn them of the consequences of continuing to burn fossil fuels. And this is a big part of why I have taken on the climate change cause and why I put so much effort into it.
Okay, your 2 extra minutes are done. Thank you. All right. So I'm not saying what your response should or should not be to any particular circumstance. I am recommending, though, then when you look to see what happens, that maybe referring to what you're committed to might give you an action that's more likely to move things along than whatever we get from our reaction. It basically ends up being some response to what's wrong. And it isn't that there aren't things that are wrong. There are. It's just a matter of in which place do you look gives you a response that gives us the best possible chance of moving things along. Okay? And again, you know, statements of declaration about where you are in your life are usually things that aren't permanent. I don't expect this statement to last much longer for Jay. It's useful as long as it's useful. As long as it gives you a worldview that says, I should be the most compassionate person this Senator Rubio's office has ever seen. You know, as long as it gives you that, then it's giving you what it should give you. And when it's not anymore, when it's just something you say, discard it and come up with something else. Okay? All right, I'm going to turn things back over to Kathy in just a second, but the last thing I want to leave you with is this. You know, there's a second component that Dr. Flores worked with us a lot, another arena of language called promises and requests that I don't have time to get into. But one of the things that was really nice about Dr. Flores' work is he was able to separate out a request or a promise as action as contrasted with what we usually add to it. So I'm going to give you a simple example. When I was in college, there was this woman named G. Sorensen. I really wanted to go out with her. Okay? And I'd been reading Dr. Flores' work already, so I was a little bit familiar. So I asked her if she would go out with me, and she said no. Now, in Dr. Flores' work, request made, request turned down, done. It's over. Now, some people would say, oh, she rejected me. According to Dr. Flores' work, I would have had to have said, Gigi, will you go out with me? And she would have had to have said, I reject you. But she didn't say she rejected me. She just said no. So I took no for no and figured, okay, that was done, and decided to ask her out if she would go out with me again. And so I said, okay, I understand you said no. Have you rethought? What do you think about going out with me? And she's like, no, I think I was crystal clear with you. No, I know. You were real crystal clear with me. That was 5 minutes ago. We're at a whole new era of our life now. So after 6 or 7 times of saying no, I finally told her, you know, I can ask this a lot more times than you can say no. Let's just be clear about this. So she agreed to go out with me, and it was college. It was awesome. So let me just leave you with a short poem from Wallace Stevens. He says, after the final no, there comes a yes. And on that yes, the future of the world depends. And I know that what I can count on for you is you will continue to ask for what needs to be asked for until that yes comes. So thank you for that. And thank you for today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mark. When I do fundraising, I teach people that no is just a very mild yes. You haven't given them reason to open up their wallets yet. So that's what you had to do. It's just a mild yes. We are going to break for lunch. I want to thank you very much, Mark. That was very inspirational, very good. I appreciate it. I actually did the exercise. You know, it was good. It was good. Thank you. And I think let's give Mark a big hand. It's great. I also want to recognize the work of Yannick and Bill, who have been staunchly helping us with the technology. So thank you very, very much. You're doing a great job.